Good morning. Again, a lot of thank yous this morning. Obviously, as Tracy said, thank you to those that got out and did some shoveling and salting for us to keep us safe. I love it when it's snowing like that, though. I mean, the living in a snow globe is a cool thing. It is pretty awesome, so I appreciate that. I appreciate the worship this morning. So good morning. Welcome to the Berean Bible Students Church here in Lombard, Illinois. We're happy that you have braved the element. You've come out and joined us. And for those of you who are watching at home, thank you for joining us as well. So this morning, we're continuing the series that Andy introed last week called Turning Points. Now, I don't know how often you guys listen to Christian radio. So that song that we just sang, Still Waters, it's a very powerful song for me. It's a song that's been around for a little while, and it's a song that when it comes on my Spotify or YouTube for me at work, as I'm sitting there in a free period or a planning period, it just warms my heart and it sets me at ease. I mean, the concept of write scripture on your heart for when you need it, because anxiety hates Psalm 23. So just say it to yourself till you believe it. And I'm feeling like I need it right now. It's a powerful song by Linnea Crawford. See, our lives are filled with moments and events that have an effect on how we live our life. This series, we hope, will help each of us to reflect on things that have happened in our lives, along with helping us to prepare for events that will happen or, frankly, could be happening right now, and that you're going through them right now in your life. So the focus of this week is on grief and loss. And this is a heavy topic, and one in which most of us have suffered a loss in some way. You know, a death of a loved one, the passing of a pet, the loss of a friendship, a fatal diagnosis, divorce, chronic illness, the loss of a prized possession, people who have left a church that you love dearly, even the failing of a test when you were in school. These things can create an issue. They can create a problem. These events in our lives, these losses can create grief. During seasons of loss and grief, we can accept God's invitation to meet Him at a slower pace while we heal. God's word and Jesus' actions demonstrate to us that He came to help those who have suffered from loss, crisis, and trauma in their lives. Jesus came to heal, to release, to set free all those who are heavy burdened in life. When we observe Scripture and the subject of grief, we soon discover that the Bible dignifies grief as a natural, God-given way to respond to loss, trauma, and crisis. Therefore, we need to learn the process of grief, understand grief, and learn the best way for us to move through grief to help someone or help ourselves through that process. The fact is, every one of us will experience grief and loss in this life. This process of recovery, all the hurt, all the pain, all the crying, all the grief will also be used by God for good. I believe God will teach us through it all to turn around to help others who might be going through a similar part of their life. We must come to understand that grief is God's design for helping a person to recover from loss. It is a therapeutic response, and it isn't evil or bad. Author Edgar Jackson poignantly described grief, and this is how it was described. Grief is a young widow trying to raise her 3 children alone. Grief is the man so filled with shock, uncertainty, and confusion that he strikes out at the nearest person. Grief is the mother walking daily to a nearby cemetery to just stand quietly alone for a few minutes before going on for the tasks of the rest of her day. She knows that part of her is in the cemetery. Just a part of her is in her daily work. Grief is the silent, knife-like terror and sadness that comes from 100 times a day when you start to speak to someone who is no longer there. Grief is the emptiness that comes when you cut or when you eat alone, eating, with another for so many years and you're all by yourself. Grief is teaching yourself to go to bed without saying goodnight to the one who had died. Grief is the helpless wishing that things were different when you know they are not and never will be again. Grief is a whole cluster of adjustments, apprehensions, and uncertainties that strike life in its forward progress, and it makes it really hard to redirect the energies of life. When my dad passed away, we knew it was coming. He was put into hospice. We knew the end was coming, but it was still really hard. Now, my dad wasn't a perfect man, but I knew he loved me. Now, I don't remember what exactly happened, and we got together with my sisters yesterday, and I didn't want to ask. But I don't remember what exactly happened after my father passed. But I maybe asked, or I maybe demanded that I'm the one who did the service for him. I don't remember how it was. Maybe they asked me to do it. Maybe I said, "Oh, guys, what do you think about me doing dad's service?" Or maybe it was, "Guys, I'm doing dad's service." I really don't know how it went, but I ended up doing a service to remember and pay tribute to my dad. It was an honor for me to put together that service. And since my dad was a retired member of the Air Force, I will never forget, and I will always tear up whenever I see it in a movie or in a TV show or live in person when they give a military tribute for someone who has fallen, who's been in the military. The folding of the flag, the whole ceremony, the handing of it to the surviving member of the family, the getting on the knee and talking to the person. It's just so powerful, and to be part of that day was amazing. Now, we had that memorial service for my dad on a Sunday. And for those of you who don't know, we plan our church schedule, by each quarter. So we plan the thing maybe 3 months and ahead of when something is happening, or 4 months. So it happened that I was scheduled to lead both services on the Sunday of my dad's service. And those of you who don't know me well should know that I don't exactly plan ahead very well. When I'm speaking in church, I'll pray about it, I'll be thinking about it a lot, but I won't be putting together my thoughts until closer to the week before. So my dad's dying in this time frame. I know I have a message in church. I demand, let's say, to do my dad's service. And so later, I realized that I did not properly grieve my dad's death. I continued to do my job as the math department chairman. I think I took off a day, but I just kept working. Okay, and then I'm preparing for my dad's service. Okay, I'm preparing for the church services that day, that Sunday that was coming up. There are many other details, right? Also, you have to take care of when someone has passed. And I jumped in, I took care of all of those details. Why? Well, basically, and I honestly believe, without purposely doing it, I was so busy that I didn't take time to stop and to feel any pain or loss. And that was a mistake. Grief is typically treated as something to be gotten over with as soon as possible. I was trying to work my way through grief. No, I wasn't working my way through grief. I was working my way around grief as much as possible. I was trying to keep my mind off of the loss and the pain. And after my dad died, I just figured this is the way I handle it. I just work my way through it. So beyond just getting over grief, there are other struggles that some of us might have when it comes to grief. So some of you might be like me, like just get over it. Just get over it. Okay, some of you might have a thought of, you know what, certain things are just not seen as being worthy of grief. Yeah, the death of a loved one, the death of my dad, yeah, we agree with that. But there are other losses in your life that you might go, oh, that's not really that important to anybody. And so it's not worthy of grief, all right? And so therefore you have a problem. Now, I don't need to share anything, right? The person goes, I don't need to share anything because other people will not understand. Or maybe they'll make me feel bad about my grief. Like, you know, Tave, I know you failed that test, but seriously, in life, that's not a big deal. Right? Have we ever tried to marginalize someone's loss? All right, I know I have. I have done that to people who have shared grief or loss with me. As a man, I had a number of male influences who modeled for me and therefore taught me that real men don't cry. Or they tell me, don't be a baby. Our culture trivializes tragedy and loss. I mean, seriously, we watch all of the devastation that's occurring. Okay, we see it on the evening news. You see it on your streams that you're a part of. But they're just given the facts, but no opportunity to grieve. I mean, children are dying of starvation. Masses are killed by earthquakes or tsunamis. Cars are driving through crowds of people and then shooting shots at people. These mass shootings are occurring. These events should break our hearts. They should break our hearts. We should pause to grieve at these tragedies. So there is no surprise then that in our hurry up and get over it culture, grieving becomes a lonely journey. A journey only the grieving participate in. And even then, they aren't willing participants in that process. So as we work this morning to understand grief better, I will talk about it from the following 4 points. Okay, we'll kind of work through these 4 points. So to start off with, we'll kind of talk through understand grief. And I found this really interesting because over the years, the definition of grief has expanded. All right, so back in 1974, the Handbook of Psychiatry defined grief as the normal response to the loss of a loved one by death. Now, we go to 1984. Dr. Therese Rando, a noted grief specialist, researcher, and author, defined grief as a process of psychological, social, and somatic reactions to the perception of loss. Then we move forward to 1981. Okay, Grief Resource Foundation of Dallas, Texas, found that for them a good working and practical definition of Grief is what's up there on the screen. The total response of the organism to the process of change. Grief isn't just about responding to death. It's about responding to loss. Although grieving the death of someone dear to us may be the most universal and most intense grief, it is not the only cause of grief. So what is grief and what produces it? Well, being a math guy, here's an equation for us, or at least a flow chart. Change can lead to loss, and loss, therefore, can lead to grief. Change leads to loss, loss can lead to grief. So basically, grief is about coming to terms with the fact that things will never be the same again. Something is lost and is never coming back. It may be something that is more obvious or tragic, like the death of a family member or a friend, a divorce, a disability, or it might be a more natural loss, such as like kind of your loss of health, your loss of youth. Not to make eye contact with anybody as I say this one, your loss of beauty. Okay? The loss of not having kids in your house. We had the loss of infertility, not being able to get pregnant. That was hard. The shattering of a lifelong dream. Okay, Andy talked about a number of these things last week. Retirement from work, okay, or a position, or a sport, right? You just have to stop doing something you've always done. Maybe you've moved, leaving home, loss of a friend, loss of a neighbor, loss of a beloved person in this church, loss of a family member who moved away, loss of financial wealth, moving, a house burning down, a loss of a valuable due to a fire or theft, maybe you've lost a child at an early age, a toddler stage, a teenage stage. This loss is just so hard. The intensity of grief depends on how the loss is perceived. If the loss is not perceived as significant, the grief reaction will be minimal or barely felt. So what do we do with our grief? The most common response, which makes me feel good, is avoid. So I'm like most other people. Okay, we avoid it. We escape it. Just get over it. Okay, sometimes there's a medication aspect to it. Yet, in John 11, we find Jesus weeping over the death of a friend. Why? Well, after all, he knew, right? He knew he'd be raising Lazarus just a little bit later. Jesus grieved the death of Lazarus. Jesus' presence offered comfort to Mary and Martha during their time of grief, right? He found his friends that survived in grief. Mary and Martha were almost swallowed up with sorrow for the death of their brother, which is demonstrated when it is said that many of the Jews, right, came to Mary and Martha to comfort them. Now, Christ's tender sympathy with his afflicted friends and the time he took to share in their sorrows, which appeared in three ways. Now, seriously, there's times where I know I'm not like Jesus, and this is one of them. Lazarus is dead. I know I'm going to raise him. These people are sad. How do I make them happy quicker? I raise Lazarus. I don't let them be sad. I don't weep with them. I just take care of the problem. I fix it. I'm not even good at fixing things, but I try really hard. All right? So how did Jesus react? Well, one, by inward groans and troubles of his spirit. Right? Jesus saw Mary weeping for the loss of a loving brother, And the Jews that came with her were weeping for the loss of a good neighbor and a friend. And when he saw this place of people who were mourning, who were weeping, this was when he groaned in the spirit and was troubled. Then they began the process of going to the grave. And as they were going to the grave, Jesus wept. Jesus had tears. Jesus cried. And then as they got closer to the grave, Jesus repeats his groans upon his coming near the grave. Again, groaning in himself, he comes to the grave and he groans. Right? Verse 38. So as I read this, as I look at Jesus, grief is not to be avoided, but entered into. Grief isn't to be avoided, but entered into. We need to accept the reality of loss and the pain that it brings, to actually cry and weep and express our pain, our disappointment, our regret. For some of you, that might mean going way back and deep down and uncovering pain that you buried a long time ago but never dealt with. Tim Keller wrote, "When Jesus weeps, we see that he doesn't believe the ministry to truth," okay, which is telling people how they should believe and turn to God, or the ministry of fixing things is enough. Right? And then he asks the question, does he? He also is a proponent of the ministry of tears. The ministry of truth and power without tears isn't Jesus. You have to have tears. So another biblical example talking about grief is one that, Andy also talked about a little bit last week. It's kind of David. Okay, this is David after Saul and Jonathan die. Right? He writes a song, he writes a poem, he moves a moving and beautiful and a detailed lament of the horror that has occurred. All right, so I'm not putting this up, I'm just going to read parts of it, but it kind of went, "Your glory, O Israel, lies slain on your heights. How the mighty have fallen. Saul and Jonathan, in life they were loved and gracious. O daughters of Israel, weep for Saul." David will anguish over the catastrophe 3 times, right? He says, "Oh, how the mighty warriors have fallen." David, consumed with grief, addresses Jonathan directly and says, "I grieve for you, Jonathan, my brother." And then the third thing David does, he orders the people to memorize and sing a lamentation that he had written. 2 Samuel 1, 17 to 27. So 2 Samuel 1, 17 to 27. Now, I'm not going to go through that whole thing. I summarized it a little bit a moment ago. But 2 Samuel 1, 17 to 27. Can you imagine when Saul and Jonathan are killed in battle? David pours out his grief with tears about the enormous loss Israel now faces. He recognizes that something precious in Israel is gone and will never return. David ordered that this song of lament be taught to all of Judah. He wanted them to learn it, memorize it, and sing it as their experience, not simply his. So why did David force people to stop and pay attention? Why did he want them to express sorrow over the death of Saul and Jonathan? Wasn't there a lot of work that needed to get done in this transition of government? There had to have been a ton of things that had to get done. Now, I believe that David understood how indispensable grieving is to spiritual maturity. David knew we benefit by taking the time to grieve our losses before moving on. He knew how important it is for people to stay connected to reality and not run from their pain. The second aspect of grief that I want to make sure I touch on this morning is pouring out your heart to God. A Christian doesn't just express their grief, but a Christian directs it. Prayer enables us to process our grief in God's presence. Psalm 42, 3-4. My tears have been food day and night, while men say to me all day long, where is your God? These things I remember as I pour out my soul. We move to Psalm 42:9. I say to God, my rock, why have you forgotten me? Why must I go on mourning, oppressed by the enemy? Psalm 77, 1-3. I cried out to God for help. I cried to God to hear me. When I was in distress, I sought the Lord at night. I stretched out untiring hands, and my soul refused to be comforted. I remember you, O God, and I groaned, I mused, and my spirit grew faint. The comfort for Christians is that someone is listening, someone sees your tears, and someone sympathizes. 2 Kings 25, go back and tell Hezekiah, the leader of my people, this is what the Lord, the God of your father David says. I have heard your prayer, and I have seen your tears. I will heal you. Then we go to Psalms 147:3. God heals the brokenhearted. God heals the brokenhearted, binding up their wounds. Psalm 34:17-18. The righteous cry out, and the Lord hears them. The Lord, is close to the brokenhearted. Isaiah 53. When you come to Jesus, you come to the one who is the man of sorrows and familiar with suffering. Okay, now you don't have to pull out your phones right now, but there's going to be a list of scriptures going up. I'm not going to read through them all, but if you are right now, you know of someone, you might want to take a picture of these Psalms that could be a good thing to share with others who could be going through a time of grief or a time of loss. Okay, if you need it some other time, please reach out. I can easily share this slide with you. All right, so we've talked about two things. Let's move on to the third. Okay, the third is as follows. Focus on the hope of Christ in the midst of your grieving. If you don't, which I didn't, right, when my dad passed, if you don't, you may end up in sinful despair. 1 Thessalonians 4:13-17. It says, brothers, we don't want you to be ignorant about those who fall asleep, or to grieve like the rest of men who have no hope. So what is that hope? Absolutely. Okay, Jesus was just whispered from the congregation, people at home. All right, we look at John 11:25-26, right? Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live, even though he dies, and whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Death itself will die, and its effects reversed. What happened to Lazarus is but a foreshadow of a greater resurrection. One day, God is going to do everything, will be restoring everything that was broken and restoring everything that was lost. Revelations 21:1-4. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Now the dwelling of God is with people, and he will live with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away." God will wipe away every tear from our eyes. It is the first thing that he will do because it is the most, it's kind of what I believe he is most anxious to do. Comfort us. Like any good and compassionate parent, when you hear your child crying, do you want to just ignore it? You want to go and put your arms around that kid, hold them, hug them. There'll be no more sorrow. There is no death, no separation, disappointment, sin, regret, pain. All we will know throughout eternity is health, love, righteousness, dignity, wholeness, life, peace, satisfaction, glory, astonishment. Heaven is the place where nothing will ever be lost, and things will only change in the sense that they will improve through learning and revelation, right? From glory to glory. Christianity offers the good news of Jesus, who weeps with us, over us, and will one day wipe away our tears once and for all. The cross was and is God's response to grief. On the cross, Jesus bore our grief and carried our sorrows. He felt his own sorrow. Right? Jesus said, "My soul is sorrowful even unto death." And on the cross, he caused great sorrow. The cross is the greatest grief-causing event in history, since it is when and where the most was lost. God lost his son. What a testimony of his love. There is no other way in which we could be restored to him, and no way that all we lost could be restored, except through what Jesus did for us. We also have this concept of allowing the old to birth the new. Now, John Milton, in Paradise Lost, he described the evil of history as a compost pile, a mixture of decaying substances such as animal excrement, vegetable and fruit peels, potato skins, eggshells, dead leaves, banana peels. All right, so if you cover it with dirt, after a few years, it smells wonderful. It doesn't at first, but after a few years, it smells really good. The soil becomes a rich and natural fertilizer, and it's tremendous for growing fruit and vegetables. But you have to be willing to wait 5 to 10 years. Milton's point is that the worst events of human history that we cannot understand or are compost in God's wonderful eternal plan. So out of the greatest evil, the death of Jesus, came the greatest good. God transforms evil into good without diminishing the awfulness of the evil. Since we have talked about grief in detail, let's examine a little bit about why grief is important and the goodness of grief. I shared earlier how I avoided grief with my dad's passing. And I learned when my mom passed short time after that, I chose to embrace grief. Jesus is the man of sorrows. Blessed are those who mourn, says Jesus, for they will be comforted. There is no joy without sorrow. Whereas we want to get the pain of grief over as soon as possible, God is seeking to use our losses and the grief of them to enlarge us and to mature us. George Sitzer, he lost his wife, his daughter, and his mother in a car accident. What did such an effect have on him? Well, this is what he concluded about grief. Catastrophic loss, by definition, precludes recovery. It will transform us or destroy us, but it will never leave us the same. There is no going back to the past. It is not therefore true that we become less through loss unless we allow the loss to make us less, grinding our soul down until there is nothing left. Loss can also make us more. I did not get over my loved ones. Rather, I absorbed the loss into my life until it became part of who I am. Sorrow took up permanent residence in my soul and enlarged it. One learns the pain of others by suffering one's own pain, by turning inside oneself, by finding one's own soul. However, painful sorrow is good for the soul. The soul is elastic, like a balloon. It can grow larger through suffering. Psalm 126, 5-6. Those who sow in tears will reap with songs of joy. He who goes out weeping, carrying seed to sow, will return with songs of joy, carrying sheaves with him. As we learn to embrace grief, there are changes that will result from that. We become compassionate as our Father in heaven is compassionate. Henry Nguyen rightly says grief is the way to compassion. There is no compassion without many tears. To become like the Father, whose only authority is compassion, I have to shed countless tears and so prepare my heart to receive anyone, whatever their journey has been, and forgive them from the heart. Absorbing our own pain, we learn to forgive. We have a greater concern for the poor, for the widow, for the orphan, for the marginalized, for the wounded. We understand them. We are less covetous, less idolatrous. We rarely say, I've got to have this or I'll die. Life is stripped of its pretense and non-essentials. We are more apt to rid ourselves of the unimportant things in life others so desperately want: power, control, money, or even approval. God really is the center of our lives. Not superficially. It's not a trivial pursuit, but God is the center of our lives. There is an enhanced sense of living in the immediate present rather than postponing life until something else happens. We easily now rearrange life's priorities to be with our spouse and our friends when we understand this type of loss. Grief can stir people's questions. Right? As we're meeting with people who are going through grief, it can stir people's questions about our existence. What happens to us after we die? And who is God? The physical absence of the loved one can also open up questions around safety People need to be able to express their hard questions while also being assured of their own safety and of those they love. We need to be there with them as they're going through it and not fix them. May we be people that can listen to others and make space for questions without feeling the need to answer them all. Loss and grief are inevitable parts of our lives in a world that has been corrupted by sin. The real struggle is not in avoiding these times, but in learning how to understand and deal with them when they do come our way. So with that, Tracy, come on up. We'll close with our last song. We'll have a prayer. We'll have some announcements. All right, so please rise, join your hearts together.